Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing my quarterly grades for the Sharks this season. So we are 21 games into the season, and as such, I've decided to review how the Sharks forwards in this first video are performing that thus far. And I will be doing that in order of their numbers, and so starting with Pavelski, who's number 8, and then ending with Melker Karlsson, who is number 68. So first up is Joe Pavelski, and of course, the main thing about Joe Pavelski at the moment is how fantastic he has been in these past 4 games. I think he has about 9 points in those 4 games, and so it is looking like a very, very good, past week, and that would reflect on his grade possibly. However, I think it's important to recall that Pavelski's start of the season was not very smooth. The first 17 games, I think he had 7 goals, and he wasn't a dominant force a lot of the times in games. Sometimes he was playing on the worst line for the Sharks besides the fourth, worse than the Couture, Hurdle, Meyer line, or worse than whatever the third line was at that time. And so there were times during this first quarter where Pavelski just wasn't a good enough force. And so if this past 4 games didn't actually happen, or let's say he even just got, 4 points in 4 games, Pavelski could be seeing something like a C in terms of a grade. However, these past 4 games do give me hope going into this next quarter of the season that Pavelski will, keep up this level, not obviously to the extent, but still. And it's a better sign than, let's say, he had started the season with 4 very good games and then played 17 mediocre games compared to the 17 mediocre games he started with 4 games. And so as such, my grade for Pavelski is a B-. Next is Evander Kane, a player who's in a sort of similar position to Pavelski. He didn't have as much of a grade past 4 games as Pavelski has. Kane has been a bit more balanced. However, there have been a lot of games where he just hasn't shown up. He takes a lot of low percentage shots, so sometimes he'll take a shot that ends the pressure for the Sharks because it just wasn't a very good one. The goalie will be able to make an easy save. Kane has normally, I'd say more often than not, been paired with Pavelski on his line, and as I said, Pavelski's line has a lot been not the worst line on the Sharks besides the fourth, and so Kane hasn't been a major factor. He has been picking up points here and there, and has made his point total look actually somewhat respectable. I think he has 15 points in 21 games, but I would like to see a bit more from Kane, a bit more consistency when it comes to the goal scoring. I want to see him use and throw his body around a bit more, and that's why he will actually get an identical grade to Joe Pavelski, which is a B-. Mostly because while Pavelski has had a very good past 4 games, I think Kane has been better in games more often than Pavelski, even if he hasn't had the highest of highs. Next is Thornton, and of course he did miss a good chunk of this first quarter of the season due to injury, but I am still, I'm not really considering that when giving him his grade, and from these other games that I've seen, besides I guess the first game of the season against the Ducks, and then I guess the Rangers and the Blue Jackets game, his first 2 games back from injury, I've really liked what I've seen from Thornton. I would like to see a bit more actual production on the score sheet, but the way he's been playing, it seems like it's going to come sooner rather than later. He's getting a lot of good chances that just haven't been able to get past the goaltender. I think at a point the floodgates will open and Thornton will start getting, not racking up a ton of points, but still getting a few, and should actually end up with a decent point total, which is why I'm giving Thornton on the season a B. Next is Marcus Sorensen, and sort of like Thornton, he's been very good during the games that he's been matched with Thornton, but unfortunately for Sorensen, he didn't get injured 9 games, and so those 9 games that Thornton wasn't playing and Sorensen he wasn't that impactful of a forward, right? Even when he was on that Suomela, Donskoi, Sorensen line, he was sort of the member that was trailing behind the other 2. He hasn't been that great on the fourth line. It's really only just been with Thornton that he has shown that he is a very capable player. However, I have liked Sorensen on the penalty kill, so that does give him a bit of a boost, which is why he'll end up with a grade as well here, 3 of the first 4, with a B-. Next is Barclay Goodrow, and Goodrow has been not great this season. The fourth line for the San Jose Sharks in general just hasn't been that impactful. Goodrow and Melker Karlsson have been in the lineup, I believe, every single game, and credit to them that the penalty kill has been very, very good, and they are a part of the penalty kill, but I would like to see some actual offense coming out of the fourth line. Now, Goodrow does have the slight redeeming quality that he played that one game against Minnesota where he was ending up on Thornton and Sorensen's line, and he actually had a very good game, which is why his grade does end up being at least a somewhat average grade of a C. Next is Donskoy, and Donskoy is sort of like Kane, except for tuned down a slight bit. Donskoy only shows up in a few games. There are a lot of games where he's mostly invisible. Some games, like if I had given a grade after every single game for Jonas Donskoy, there would probably be multiple where he'd be like a D or a D+, just because he's just not apparent in enough games. However, when he does get to his strong games, he is a very tough opponent to play against. But again, we're just not seeing that consistently enough, and as such, I can't give Donskoy that great of a grade, and so he'll end up with a C+. Next is Timo Meier, and Meier has been having himself a very good season. He has been at 12 goals now for a few games. However, it's not for a lack of chances. Timo Meier, for some reason, has just, I guess, maybe had a bit of luck earlier on that he was burying a lot of those chances. Now in these past few games, he's been getting the grade A chances. He just hasn't been able to put them to the back of the net. And we saw against the St. Louis Blues, he had 2 or 3, and he just couldn't get them past Chad Johnson to get those 2 or 3 goals. And so he's been passed by Pavelski for the goal-scoring lead. However, Meier has still been very, very good. He's very, very apparent in almost every single game he plays. He's become a very good forward for the San Jose Sharks, definitely one of their top 3 forwards on the team, in my opinion at least. And Meier's development, when it was still looking like this might be a stepping stone of a season, maybe this is the first season that is going to be the major breakthrough of Timo Meier for the rest of his career, which is why I do give him a grade of an A. Not perfect, but still fantastic first quarter. Next is Logan Couture. Couture sort of tied to Meier, but the thing about Logan Couture is that I didn't really like his start of the season. I thought for the first 5 or 6 games, Couture just wasn't very good, and not just in terms of not getting points. He wasn't even getting chances. I just didn't like his play in those first few games, and I also haven't liked his play in these past few games besides the Blues one. The Blues one, he definitely picked it up and played a strong game, but in the previous 3 or 4 before that, it wasn't that great. And so Couture is sort of a player who I'm looking at these 21 games and I'm saying, your first 5 weren't very good, your, I guess, last 4 or 5 weren't very good, but that middle part was absolutely fantastic. Couture being part of that fantastic Couture-Meier Hertl line, doing a very, very good job, and he does get the toughest assignments. He gets like 20 minutes a night or something. He plays against the opposing team's top competition, and so you do have to give some credit and some lenience to some sort of bad games, which is why I'm still going to give Couture a very respectable grade, but just not at the level of Timo Meier, I don't think. A-. Next is Antti Suomela. Suomela is a player who was sort of hoped to be able to take over for Chris Tierney once he was traded. He was our previous third-line center last year, traded in the Ottawa Senators trade, and Suomela just doesn't really have that defensive aspect of the game that allows them to play, let's say, 14, 15 minutes a night. So Suomela's getting something like around 10 to 11 a night from Peter DeBoer, sometimes even less than that, into like the 7 or 8 category. I think Suomela has been doing a pretty respectable job putting up decent numbers in the limited ice time that he has been getting. He's been playing pretty well defensively, even if he's not a defensive-oriented forward. He's been doing some decent plays in the offensive zone. It's nothing that blows me away, but still has been a decent season thus far for Suomela, and so he will get a grade of a B-. Next is Tomas Hertl. Now, Hertl has been dealing with a bit of injuries thus far this season. I believe that he's missed about 5 of these first 21 games. Not huge, but he is still injured at the moment. I'm not sure if he's going to be playing on Tuesday. However, Hertl has been, similar to Meier, a very, very good player. He played on the Hertl Couture-Meier line. I have been quoted to saying that Hertl has been the best Sharks forward, or at least he was maybe 5-6 games ago. And I truly do believe that Hertl is able to control the ice when he's on the ice. He's just able to bring a couple of opposing teams' players towards him. It opens up lanes for players like Couture and like Timo Meier. It's a big reason why Meier has been able to jump out to these 12 goals, because Hertl is just doing such a great job at creating space for both of his line mates whenever he's on the ice. And he's a major contributing forward for the San Jose Sharks. So again, not a perfect start of the season for him, but still deserves a grade of an A. Next is Chartier, who I was sort of considering not including, but I felt the need to, I guess, do so. He did play 13 games this season. That is technically more than Thornton played, and I have Thornton here, so I felt the need to include Chartier, but there isn't much to say about him. Again, I was hoping for a bit more from the fourth line. Chartier found most of his time on that fourth line, didn't get to do much besides get his first NHL goal, so congrats to him. But that was on sort of the end of a shift with Meyer and Hurdle, so it wasn't even a sort of a fourth line, forechecking goal. And so just in general, Chartier was basically average, didn't really play the penalty kill, but he wasn't as, I feel like, bad defense or offensively as Gaudreau and Carlson have been, just because he didn't play as many games and he does have a goal. So I will give Chartier a similar average grade of a C. Next is Kevin Labanc, and this was an interesting one to evaluate because, as I've said in my previous review, Labanc has had a pretty tough start to the season. You know, he never really found a spot on the team. A lot of people were calling for him to be healthy scratched, and I would not have blamed DeBoer if that was something that happened, but DeBoer did not give up on him, surprisingly, as normally DeBoer is someone to punish a bit of these younger forwards. I guess the Sharks didn't have much of a better option in terms of a top six forward for that position, which is why Labanc was never scratched, but he was moved down a couple times to the fourth line. However, like Sorensen, Labanc has seemed to have found his spot on the third line with Joe Thornton and Marcus Sorensen, and so he has picked up his game as of late, and so he reaches this grade in a similar way to Jonas Donskoy does when I give him a C+, because he hasn't been great this start of the season, but he is trending upwards right now. You know, if he never really found that space with Thornton, I'd probably give him even like a C- for the start of the season. Still decent on the power play and such, but just not good enough defensively. But because he has found this place, it's a C+ at the moment, but it is trending upward into the next quarter. Finally, Melker Karlsson, a player who I am somewhat down about. You know, he's played every single game. He is a decent part of the penalty kill. He's okay defensively as well, but he plays on the fourth line that just hasn't been doing that much. And the thing about Melker Karlsson is a lot of the times, surprisingly in games, Peter DeBoer is the one who takes Melker Karlsson, moves him up in the lineup if he feels like punishing somebody or somebody gets injured. And so I think Karlsson has spent time with both Couture and Meyer on some shifts. He spent time with Pavelski and Thornton on some shifts. And even in those shifts, he hasn't been able to really get anything generated. I think he has, like a single point on the season, if even that. I don't know his exact stat total, but it has been rather disappointing. However, again, like Gaudreau, the penalty kill sort of redeems him, which makes his grade at least somewhat respectable, which is why I will give him, it is still the worst grade on the team, but a C-. But that will do it for these grades. I will have the defense and goaltending grades up a bit later. You'll notice that these aren't that harsh. They are still somewhat high, but that's also because the Sharks offense has been quite solid this year, at least offensively. You know, some of these players haven't been the best on the defensive zone, which has been an issue, but I felt like focusing a lot more on the offensive aspects of the game, and the Sharks forwards have been pretty solid when it comes to that this season. Class dismissed.